stand up. Stop faking it. My husband yelled as I lay paralyzed on a driveway. Enjoy watching.
My husband Mark told me to stop faking it while I lay face down on our driveway. Unable to feel anything below my waist with a shattered pulled pork platter dripping barbecue sauce into my hair. His mother Linda had spent 3 days decorating that yard for his 40th birthday. And apparently my collapsing in front of 16 guests was the one party detail she hadn't planned for. My name is Alina Vasquez. I'm 34 years old and I work as a billing specialist for a group of animal hospitals in Independence, Kentucky. I spend my days making sure cat owners pay for their Maine Coon's teeth cleaning, which by the way costs more than my own last dental visit. But that's a different kind of depressing. Let me back up about 6 hours. It was a Saturday in July, Mark's birthday. Linda had turned our modest 3-bedroom split level on Maple Street into what I can only describe as a Pinterest board for a man who once told me his ideal birthday was a steak and nobody talking to me. There were streamers, there was a banner. There was a cake shaped like a golf bag which made no sense because Mark's sport was fantasy football, but Linda had her vision. And questioning Linda's vision was something you simply did not do. Been feeling wrong for 6 months? It started as a tingle in my feet, that pins and needles feeling you get when you sit too long, then it got worse. Crushing fatigue that made my 9-hour shifts feel like marathons. Blurred vision that would come and go, my legs giving out in the shower one night. I caught myself on the tile wall, heart hammering. Every time I mentioned it to Mark, he had the same answer. You're overthinking it, you're stressed, drink some water. And Linda told me with a straight face that young women these days had no stamina. This from a woman who took a 20-minute break to sit down after carrying a bag of potato rolls from her car. But that Saturday I was trying. I was carrying a platter of smoked pulled pork. The good stuff from that barbecue place on Highland Avenue that charges you like they're handing you gold. Across the driveway toward the backyard gate and halfway. There, my legs just quit. No warning, no stumble. They switched off, like someone pulled a plug. I went down hard. The platter hit first, then my knees, then my face. I lay there on the head concrete with pork grease soaking into my top, and I could not move my legs. I could not feel my legs. Trito wiggled my toes and got nothing. Absolute zero below my hips. Terrace not a big enough word. Mark was at the grill when he heard the crash. He walked over, didn't run, walked, looked down at TM, and the first thing out of his mouth was not, "Are you okay?" It was, "Seriously, Alina." He told me to get up. Said I was making a scene. When I said, I couldn't feel my legs, his face didn't show worry. It showed annoyance, like I'd spilled something on his good shirt. Here's the thing I didn't understand until later. Mark expected my health to get worse gradually. Slow fade. What happened on that driveway wasn't part of his schedule. So his reaction, the irritation, the eye rolling, the stop faking it, that was panic wearing a mask. He fell back on story he'd been telling everyone for months. Alina is dramatic. Alina imagines things. Alina wants attention. He needed every single person at that party to see me as the wife who cried wolf. And it worked. One of Mark's co-workers, a tall guy in a Bengals hoodie, took a step toward me. Instinct, basic human decency. Mark waved him off without even looking at him. She does this. Give her a minute. The guy stopped. Step back. 16 people at that party, and not one of them came to help me. That's what months of gaslighting boys you. Linda was the loudest. She marched over, hands on her hips, and announced loud enough for the neighbors to hear that I was pulling a stunt to ruin her son's special day, she said. Always had to make everything about myself. She spent 3 days planning that party, but couldn't spare 3 seconds to notice that her daughter-in-law was lying on concrete, unable to move. Meanwhile, I noticed something I hadn't thought about until that exact moment. Lying there with my cheek on hot asphalt and the smell of smoked meat pooling next to my face. $1,500 had vanished from our savings account last month. Mark said car repairs. Our Toyota still had the same check engine light it had had since February. And 4 weeks ago, I'd found a credit card statement I'd never seen before. $8,200 under Mark's name at our address. He told him it was a bank error. He said he'd call them. He never called. Mark walked back to the grill. Linda followed. The music kept playing. Some classic rock station Mark liked. I was alone on the driveway. I couldn't move. I couldn't get up. And for about 90 seconds, I genuinely thought this was how my story ended. Face down, invisible, surrounded by people who decided I wasn't worth believing. Then I heard a siren. Someone had called 911. To this day, I don't know who. But that sound cutting through the music and the laughter from the backyard was the only thing in the world telling me I wasn't completely alone. Before we continue, please hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single one, and it thankfully makes my day. Thank you so much for being here. Let me take you back, because what happened on that driveway didn't start on that driveway. It started 4 years ago in a break room set smelled like burnt coffee and stale donuts. I met Mark through a coworker named Brian who swore he was one of the good ones. He worked as a warehouse supervisor at a regional auto parts distributor about 25 minutes outside Independence. Decent job, steady paycheck, the kind of guy who showed up on time and remembered your birthday when we started dating. He was attentive, thoughtful. He'd leave little notes in my car. He texted back fast. He asked about my day and actually listened. My grandmother would have called him a keeper. We got married after 13 months. Quick, I know. But when you're 30 and someone makes you feel like you're the only person in the room, you stop counting months and start counting reasons to say yes. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was more like water damage. Slow, invisible, and by the time you notice, the structure solidly compromised. Linda moved from being an involved mother to a permanent fixture. She had a key to our house. She used it. I'd come home from work and find her rearranging my kitchen cabinets. That goes the flow wasn't logical. She critiqued my cooking, my cleaning. The way I folded towels. Apparently, I'd been doing it wrong for 34 years and nobody told me. And Mark's response was always the same. Gentle redirect. That's just how she is. She means well. Don't make it a thing, Alina. I made nothing a thing. For 3 years, I made absolutely nothing a thing. And that is a problem with being the person who keeps the peace. Eventually, people stop noticing you're in the room at all. Then came the money. Mark suggested we combine our accounts about 1 year into the marriage. Simpler, he said. We're a team. I make $44,000 a year. Not a fortune, but it's real money. Earned every cent processing invoices and arguing with pet insurance companies. And yet somehow there wasn't ever enough left over. I'd check our balance, and it would be lower than it should be. Groceries and bills didn't add up to what was missing. I mentioned it once. Mark said I was bad with numbers, which is genuinely hilarious coming from a man talking to a billing specialist. Now I know where it went. That credit card I found, the one with $8,200 balance. I wasn't supposed to see was covering expenses. I didn't know existed, but I'll get to that. 6 months before the driveway collapse, my body started sending me messages I couldn't tiner. Month 1, tingling in my feet after work. Every night like static. Mark said I was sitting weird at my desk. Month 2, fatigue that hit like a wall. I'd come home and sleep straight through until dinner. I was dragging myself through shifts. Making mistakes on 9 voices. But, I'm a 6. Linda heard about it and told Mark, quote, young women these days just don't have any stamina. This from a woman who retired early because of supervising a school cafeteria. Was too demanding on the knees? Month 3, a blurred vision episode at work right in the middle of processing a file. The screen went fuzzy, stayed fuzzy for about 50 seconds, then cleared. I was scared. Tried to book a doctor's appointment, and that's when I discovered Mark had forgotten to add me to his health insurance after he switched jobs 3 months earlier. He said he'd handle it. Weeks passed, he didn't handle it. Oh no, this wasn't forgetfulness. A wife without insurance is a wife without medical records. Month 4. My legs buckled in the shower. No warning. I went sideways into the tile. Caught myself on the grab bar we'd installed for when Linda visited. I told Mark. He said I probably slipped on conditioner. I started keeping a flashlight by Thebed in case my legs gave out at night. Which is one of those details that sounds paranoid until it saves you from splitting your head. Open on a nightstand at 2 a.m. month 5, the numbness spread up past my ankles. My feet felt like they belonged to someone else. I finally stopped, waiting for Mark to fix insurance situation, and made my own doctor's appointment. Paid $310 out-of-pocket cash from a small emergency account. Keep at it a separate credit union, $2,500 that nobody knows about. My grandmother told me when I was 19, every woman should have money that belongs to her alone in a place nobody else can touch. I never appreciated that advice more than the day I handed that cash to the receptionist. The doctor ordered blood work. Results weren't back yet when I hit the driveway. One more thing about those 6 months, my evening tea. I've been drinking herbal tea before bed for years. Chamomile, nothing fancy. About 6 months ago, it started tasting slightly different. Not bad, just off. A faint bitterness that wasn't there before. I mentioned it to Mark. He said he'd switched brands because the old one went up in price. Made sense. I shrugged it off. Here's the thing that haunts me. For those entire 6 months, Mark made that tea for me every single night. Never missed. I actually thought it was sweet. My husband, who forgot our anniversary 2 years in a row, who couldn't trimmer to buy milk. If I didn't text him, somehow never once forgot my evening tea. I thought it was his love language. Turns out his love language was something I couldn't have imagined. And while my body was falling apart, Mark was building a story. About 4 months before the collapse, he started telling people, his family, our friends, even my own sister Rachel, that I'd become obsessed with being sick. He used careful words, anxious, fragile. I'm worried about her honestly, like mentally. He was so convincing that Rachel called me and asked gently, carefully, if I was doing okay, like in your head. My own sister, the person who knew me better than anyone, even she bought it. That's the thing about gaslighting. It doesn't just fool the victim, it fools everyone around them. The ambulance pulled up at 5:02 p.m. I know the exact time because I could see Mark's oversized backyard clock. One Linda bought him for Father's Day, even though he has no children, from where I lay on the concrete. The back doors opened, and out stepped a woman with short blonde hair. And the kind of calm that only comes from 12 years of walking into other people's worst days. Her name tag read Morrison, Jenna Morrison. She was Mabel, mid-40s, shoulders like she'd lifted her share of stretchers, and she read the scene the way a mechanic reads an engine B. What didn't sound right? Jenna knelt beside me, latex gloves already on. She started the standard neuro checks, tested sensation in both legs with a pinprick tool, checked my reflexes with that little rubber hammer, shined a light in my eyes. I had zero sensation below my hips. My reflexes were wrong. She tapped my knee and nothing happened. Not reduced, nothing. She kept her face neutral, but I watched her documentation up longer. She was writing more than a standard intake form required. Then came the questions. When did the symptoms start? 6 months ago. Any medications? No, I don't even have insurance right now. Any changes in diet or routine? I mentioned the tea, the brand switch, the taste change, the fact that Mark made it very night. Jenna didn't react. No dramatic pause, no widened eyes. She just wrote it down. But I noticed her pen slowed for a second on the word tea. And then she underlined something I couldn't read from my angle on the ground. Mark was hovering. He'd come back from the backyard once the ambulance showed up. Couldn't exactly ignore flashing lights in his own driveway. He stood about 5 feet away, arms crossed, and started talking. Not to me, to Jenna. She's been like this for months. It's probably stress-related. Can you maybe check her anxiety? He was performing. Helpful, concerned husband managing the situation. Jenna asked Mark to step back so she could work. He didn't move. She asked again, calm, firm, no argument in her voice. Just the kind of tone that says, "This isn't a request." Mark's jaw tightened. "This is my driveway," he said. "She's my wife." Jenna looked at him for about 2 seconds without blinking and said, she needed space to properly assess her patient. Here's what I didn't understand until later. Jenna wasn't just annoyed by Mark, she was cataloging his behavior because in 12 years as a paramedic, she'd seen plenty of worried husbands. They pace, they ask questions about the hospital, they hold their wife's hand even when the paramedic tells them to move. They donut stand with their arms crossed, giving a medical history that sounds rehearsed. Mark wasn't acting like a man watching his wife suffer, he was acting like a managing a narrative. And Jenna Morrison had been doing this job long enough to know the difference. She picked up her radio, called dispatch, requested police to the scene, and here's the thing. She used a completely standard, legitimate reason, family member interfering with patient care and becoming verbally aggressive. Hey, this is real. Paramedics do this all the time. Mark heard the word police and stiffened, but Jenna played it cool. "Sir, I just need you to step back so I can do my job safely. Standard procedure." He backed off, annoyed but not alarmed. Him being too close? It wasn't only about that. They loaded me into the ambulance. Mark didn't ride with me, he said he'd follow later. He had to take care of the guests. Linda was already in the backyard telling everyone I'd be fine by morning. I lay on that stretcher staring at the ceiling of the ambulance and Jenna sat beside. Me checking my vital signs said one thing that wasn't medical. "You're not crazy." I want you to know that I almost broke right there. At the hospital, things moved fast and slow at the same time. I was processed, scanned, blood drawn. The ER doctor, a young woman who looked like she'd slept about 4 hours, listened to Jenna's handoff notes with more attention than you'd expect for a leg numbness case. Because Jenna had flagged something in her report, she'd pulled the doctor aside and laid out what she observed. Progressive peripheral neuropathy symptoms, Machinga dietary timeline change, combined with a spouse whose behavior at the scene was inconsistent with genuine concern. She recommended expanded toxicology beyond the standard panel. The doctor agreed. She ordered a full MRI of my spine and a comprehensive toxicology screen. Second, they don't run unless they're looking for something specific. Mark showed up 3.5 hours later, 3.5 hours, he walked into my room. Didn't ask what the doctor said, didn't ask if I was in pain, didn't look at the monitors. He asked when I'd be released because the house is a mess from the party and Mom's really upset. Then he sat in the corner chair and checked his phone for 25 minutes. I lay there watching my husband scroll through what I'm pretty sure was a fantasy football league group chat while I couldn't feel my own legs. And I thought, this is the man I chose. This is the man I married. Sometimes your taste in men is so bad you can't even blame the men. A nurse came in around 9:30 p.m. She asked me the standard screening question. Do you feel safe at home? It's a question they ask everyone, but she asked it slowly. She made eye contact. She waited. I said yes automatically the way you do. But the question sat in my chest like a stone that wouldn't dissolve. While I lay there, I had nothing but time in my phone. I logged into our joint bank account. The $1,500 was still labeled car repairs. But now, with nothing to do but stare at a screen, I noticed something I'd missed before. Small at withdrawals, $80 at a time, from a machine in Erlanger, Kentucky. We don't live in Erlanger. We don't shop in Erlanger. I don't know a single person in Erlanger. The withdrawals went back 5 months. Regular as rent. I didn't sleep that night. Around 5:30 a.m., the door tummy room opened. The doctor walked in and behind her were 2 people I'd never seen. A woman in scrubs who introduced herself as the hospital's patient advocate, and a woman in a dark suit with a badge on her belt. The doctor pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down. And that's when I knew, because doctors don't pull up chairs for good news. They pull up chairs when they need you sitting still for what comes next. The woman with the badge was Detective Rachel Kim, Kenton County PD, early 40s, no-nonsense haircut. The kind of face thought probably hadn't looked surprised since the Bush administration. She sat in the plastic chair next to my bed, like she'd had this 100 times. She probably had. The doctor spoke first. She explained the MRI results carefully, was reading a verdict. The scan showed progressive damage to my peripheral nervous system, specifically autoimmunity of the nerve fibers. In plain English, the protective coating around my nerves was being stripped away. She said the pattern was not consistent with multiple sclerosis, not Guillain-Barré, not any autoimmune condition. The pattern was chemical. Something was destroying my nerves from the inside, and it had been doing it for months. Then came the toxicology. They found methylene chloride in my blood. If you didn't know what that is, I didn't either. It's an industrial solvent, paint stripper, degreaser, the kind of chemical you find in warehouses and manufacturing plants. The kind of chemical a warehouse supervisor at an auto parts distributor would have access to every single day. The levels in my blood were not from a single accident elixir. They were consistent with repeated small dose ingestion over an extended period, months. Someone had been feeding it to me. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I went completely still. You? No. That feeling when your brain receives information that's so far outside anything you've ever considered it just stops processing. Like a computer that hits an error and the screen freezes. That was me. The man I slept beside every night. The man who handed me tea and said, "Good night, babe." The man who kissed my forehead sometimes before he left for work. Detective Kim let the silence sit for a moment, then started asking questions. Methodical, no drama. When did the tea taste change? Who made it? How often? What did Mark do for work? When I said auto parts distributor, she wrote something down and underlined it twice. She asked about our finances, our relationship, Linda's involvement in our daily life. She asked if Mark had taken out any insurance policies recently. I said I didn't know. Her expression told she already suspected the answer. Kim was honest with me. She said the concentration levels, the timeline matching the T, Mark's occupational access to industrial solvents. It pointed in one direction. But she also promised they'd build the case on evidence, not assumptions. And then the evidence started coming fast. They got a search warrant for our house that same day, in Mark's workshop in the garage, behind a shelf of paint, cans and old fantasy football trophies. They found a half-empty container of industrial-grade chloride. His employer confirmed Mark had been signing out this compound for 7 months, consistently more than his warehouse role required. His supervisor never questioned it because Mark had worked there 9 years and was considered reliable. Thus, think about trust. It's the perfect hiding place. The financial forensics hit next. That $8,200 credit card I'd found, the charges traced to 2 things. First, monthly premiums on a $400,000 life insurance policy on me, taken out 8 months ago. Simplified issue. No medical exam required, which is exactly why Mark chose it. My signature on the application was forged. Second, rent own a studio apartment in Kentucky, 350 square feet with a view of a car wash parking lot, signed 6 months ago under Mark's name. Those at withdrawals I'd noticed from the hospital, all within 2 blocks of that apartment. Mark wasn't just trying to collect insurance money. He was building a whole separate life ready to step into once I was gone. His grand escape plan was a sad studio in Kentucky with linoleum floors. The man really did lack imagination. Then Kim showed me Linda's text messages. Individually, they looked harmless. A mother checking on her son, but in context, they were devastating. She brought up the tea thing again at dinner, heads up. She scheduled something with a doctor for Tuesday, that pretty Saturday, while she better not pull anything. Linda wasn't. Just a difficult mother-in-law. She was a valence. She was monitoring my suspicions and feeding Mark real-time intelligence. She knew about the tea. She knew what was in it. She helped manage the entire thing. That's the one that broke me, not Mark. I could almost file Mark under greed and cowardice. But Linda was a 64-year-old woman, a mother. She stood over me on that driveway and accused me of faking while she knew exactly why I couldn't move. She watched him deteriorate for 6 months. And her only concern was that I might tell a doctor before the job was finished. Miss Sister Rachel arrived at the hospital that evening. She'd been crying so hard, her eyes were nearly swollen shut. She grabbed my hand and said she was sorry. Sorry for believing Mark. Sorry for that phone call. Sorry for asking if I was okay in my head. She'd been manipulated same as everyone else. I told her it wasn't her fault, and I meant it. When someone lies that well, that people who believe them aren't stupid, they're just human. Before Kim left that night, she paused at the door. She said there was one more thing. Investigation turned up. Something about Linda's first husband, Mark's father, Eamon, named Robert Hayes, who died in February of 2012 at age 50. Cause of death: progressive neurological failure of undetermined origin. He'd been sick for approximately 6 months before he died. Tingling, fatigue, loss of motor function. The case was closed as natural causes. Linda was the grieving widow. Kim said she'd requested the old case file from county archives. The symptoms in Robert's death certificate were almost identical to mine. She let that sit in the air between us. Then she said goodnight. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, tap that like button and tell me in the comments. Did you see that twist coming? I read every single one and I love hearing from you. Now, where were we right the next morning? It was 6:15 a.m. still dark, the kinda early where even the birds haven't committed yet. 4 unmarked cars pulled onto Maple Street and stopped in front of the house where 36 hours earlier I'd been. Lying on the driveway while my husband told me to stop acting. Detective Kim rang the doorbell. Pawned the door half asleep, wearing gym shorts and a faded promotional t-shirt from a barbecue competition. Gone 2-3 summers ago. He saw the badge and his face did something I wish I could have. Seen in person? Not shock, Kim told me later. Recognition, the look of a man who'd been waiting for a knock hoped would never come. Mark was arrested on charges of attempted murder by poisoning, insurance fraud, and forgery. He didn't scream, he didn't protest his innocence. He went quiet. Kim told me afterward that this was more common than people think. The ones who planned it usually go silent. Hello. It's the innocent ones who yell. Mark said exactly 4 words during his arrest. I want a lawyer. Not I didn't do it. Not this is a mistake. He asked for a lawyer the way a man asks for a life jacket when the boat is already underwater. 15 minutes later, 6:30 a.m., officers arrived at Linda's house. She lived 10 minutes away on a street she'd always been proud of. Neat lawn, American flag on the porch, the kind of house that says, respectable woman lives here. She opened the door in a bathrobe. When she saw the badges, she tried to close it. An officer put his foot in the gap. She was arrested as an accessory to attempted murder. Unlike her son, Linda did yell. She called it a mistake. She said, I was a liar. She said her Mark would never do something like this. Her neighbor, Margaret Malley, was outside walking her beagle at 6:30 a.m. because Margaret was that kind of neighbor and saw the whole thing. Margaret, the same woman Linda had bragged to for a decade about what a wonderful, devoted son Mark was. No cameras, no reporters, no courtroom scene, just badges, handcuffs. And 2 people who thought they'd never get caught being put into the back of separate cars on a quiet Tuesday morning. That's how justice actually works. It's not dramatic. Early and it's permanent. Custody, things fell apart fast for both of them. They'd initially hired the same attorney, but within a week, he dropped them both. Conflict of interest? Because their defenses were going to contradict each other. Mark's angle, my mother pressured me into it. Linda's angle, I had no idea what he was doing. Those 2 stories can't both be true, and an attorney can't argue both. In the same courtroom, so now they each needed separate lawyers, cheaper ones because all their assets had been frozen. Mark was denied bail. The forged insurance policy, the secret apartment, the signed out solvents, it all added up to premeditation and flight risk. He sat in the Kenton County Detention Center wearing orange instead of that barbecue shirt. Linda's bail was set at $600,000. She couldn't post it. She sat in a holding facility 15 minutes from her son, and neither of them could contact the other. But the real blow came when Kim visited me at the hospital for the last time. She had the old case file. Robert Hayes, Mark's father, Linda's first husband, died in February 2012 at 50. The medical records described 6 months off progressive neurological deterioration, tingling, fatigue, muscle weakness, eventual organ involvement. No toxicology was ordered at the time. It was 2012. He was a middle-aged man with no known enemies, and his wife was a cafeteria supervisor, not exactly a crime suspect. Case was closed as undetermined natural causes. No dialogue twice until now. Kim told me the district attorney had authorized a full reinvestigation, including the possibility of exhumation if the forensic toxicologist found enough reason in the old medical records. She was careful. She said this didn't mean Linda definitely killed Robert, but the pattern was there. Same symptoms, same timeline, same household. And the implication hit me like a truck. If Linda did this before, then she didn't just help Mark, she taught him. The tea, the microdoses, the patience, the gaslighting. This wasn't a son's idea that his mother assisted with. This was a mother's method passed down like arachipi, the most terrifying family tradition I'd ever heard of. Mark wassed over me and told me to stop faking it, was now sitting in a cell where he couldn't go anywhere at all. And Linda, who accused me of seeking attention, was getting more attention than she'd ever wanted from a grand jury. With the poisoning stopped, my body started fighting back. The neurologist explained it to me straight. Peripheral nerves can regenerate, but slowly, about an inch per month. Some of the damage from 6 months of methylene chloride exposure might be permanent. I might always have some numbness in my feet. I told her I could live with that. I was alive, which was more than Mark had planned for. The first 2 weeks were the hardest, not physically, emotionally. I lay in that hospital bed, processing the fact that my husband had been trying to kill me with me on bedtime tea. That's not something they make a greeting card for. There's no "sorry your spouse tried to poison you" section at Hallmark, though honestly there probably should be. It'd sell better than you'd think, but my body was healing. Sensation came back to my upper legs first. This warm, prickly feel, blood returning to a limb that fell asleep, then my knees, then my shins. After 3 weeks, I stood up for the first time in the hospital corridor, 5 steps. Rachel was beside me, holding my arm, crying again, but this time the good kind. 5 steps doesn't sound like much, but when the last time you were on your feet, you were collapsing onto a driveway while your husband rolled his eyes. 5 steps feels like crossing a finish line. I kept walking. 6 steps the next day, then 15, then the length off the hallway. The physical therapist said I was ahead of schedule, which I appreciated because I have never once in my life been ahead of schedule for anything. My legs weren't perfect, they shook. The left one was weaker than Therapist, but they worked. They held me up, and nobody was standing over me, telling me to stop faking it. The legal side moved faster than I expected. Mark faced charges of attempted first-degree murder, assault, insurance fraud, and forgery, 15 to 25 years. His employer fired him immediately and handed over complete records of every solvent sign-out for the past 2 years. Turns out corporation scope. Very quickly. When the alternative is being named in a poisoning case, Mark's cheaper replacement attorney tried to negotiate a plea. The DA wasn't interested. Linda was charged as accessory to attempted murder. The 2012 investigation into Robert's death was active. A forensic toxicologist was reviewing the original medical records, and the DA's office had filed for potential exhumation. If those charges landed, Linda's situation went from bad to catastrophic. Her replacement attorney advised her to cooperate. She refused, insisted she was innocent, insisted she didn't know what Mark was doing with the tea. The text messages on her phone said otherwise, and text messages don't change their story under pressure. The $400,000 insurance policy was voided immediately. The forged signature alone was a separate felony. My divorce attorney filed for emergency dissolution, and full asset seizure. Under Kentucky law, when a spouse commits a felony against you, the court doesn't split things down the middle, it splits them in your direction. The house, the savings, everything in the joint accounts, mine. The $1,500 Mark stole 4 car repairs, mine. Total assets recovered. Roughly $195,000, including house equity. Not a fortune, but every single dollar was mine. I sold the house 3 months later. I didn't want to live on a street where I'd been face down on the driveway while 16 people watched. I found a small apartment in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. 15 minutes from Rachel, nothing fancy, 1 bedroom. A kitchen with enough counter space to make my own tea, and a window that gets afternoon sun. I went back to work at the clinic. Same commute. Same invoices, same Maine Coon dental claims. But I make my own tea now, and some nights I skip by Tentley just because I can. I adopted a 3-legged dog from the clinic. A scruffy terrier mix missing his front leg from an accident before he was rescued. I named him Jury. I know it's a little on the nose. I know it's the kind of name that makes people smile and shake their head. I don't care. He sits on my lap every evening. In that apartment in Fort Thomas, snoring like a small buzzsaw, and he doesn't care what his name is. He just cares that someone chose him. Sometimes the people who scream at you to stand up are the same ones who put you on the ground. And sometimes you have to fall all the way down before you finally see who's really standing over you. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. More of my best stories are already right there on your screen. Pickin', and I'll see you in just a moment.